Hello everyone, today I'm going to be talking about Rebecca Fowler. So who is she? She is the only person who was tried, found guilty of, and executed for witchcraft in Maryland. Basically this happened in 1685. She was found guilty of bewitching Francis Sainsbury and several others in Calvert County. A bit of some context, just establish some timeline stuff with legal proceedings, and just to get a general idea of what witchcraft is like in Maryland. Basically, England passes the Witchcraft Act of 1604. 30 years later, the colony of Maryland is established. Then a year after that, the Maryland Assembly formally adopts said Witchcraft Act, making it now so that witchcraft is illegal in Maryland and is punishable by the death penalty. A couple decades later, Maryland actually reformed its legal system a little bit to where now all capital cases can only be done by the provincial court. Basically, any cases that could end in the death penalty can't be done by local courts, only by the provincial one. It was seen to be a preventative measure to stop any hysterical events, not just with witchcraft, but other events that could end with some mass killings by local courts, just to stop that, any panicking or whatnot. And then a couple decades later, we have Rebecca Fowler, who is accused and found guilty of witchcraft. Now, moving on, some background. Rebecca Logan, as she was originally called, arrived in Maryland in 1656 as an indentured servant to one man named George Collins, who was a shoemaker and a tobacco farmer. Over the years of working for him, she met a fellow indentured servant named John Fowler, who she fell in love with, and when her indentured servitude was finally over with, she then married John and became Rebecca Fowler. Apparently they were quite good with their money, they were quite frugal, and they were eventually able to save up enough to buy some land, which they then named Fowler's Delight in Calvert County. And so they, over the years of working and getting more money, they were eventually able to buy some indentured servants, including a man named Francis Sainsbury, as he'll be brought up multiple times. So the trial itself. By this point, John Fowler had died for some reason. It's not really specified, but basically, on August 31st, Rebecca Fowler is accused of witchcraft by Francis Sainsbury and other persons of doing his and their bodies were very much the worst, consumed, pined, and lamented against the peace. Basically, they were, she cast, I guess, some kind of spell on them to cause them physical bodily pain. And so then, and apparently this had been going on for a while, this was just the latest in the hundreds of cases, as they seem to describe, that this was just a long line of stuff she had done. So then the provincial court convenes on September 29th, and Rebecca Fowler is brought to court on September 30th. She pleads not guilty to the charges. It is unknown what evidence is given, though apparently there was evidence given that was substantial enough to convict her, but also the testimony. Only Francis Sainsbury gave testimony to her to the alleged crimes. None of the other supposed victims are named or give any testimony. Over here we have the judges for the case and the jury members who would be deliberating. So then moving on to the later stages, on October 22nd, after hearing all this supposed evidence and the testimony, the jury advises the judge that she should be found guilty of witchcraft, for apparently having not the fear of God before her eyes, but being led by the instigation of the devil certain evil and diabolical arts called witchcrafts, enchantments, charms, and sorceries. On the next day, the judge convicts her to death by hanging, which happens on October 9th. This is a reenactment of the trial, and actually historic St. Mary's, right across the road from the college. They do that they have a reenactment of the courthouse and the whole scene. It's a whole event. So it's quite interesting. And now, just some deliberations that I was thinking about while going over all this. It's interesting how with the dynamic between Fowler and Sainsbury. Fowler is Sainsbury's master, and from the looks of it, from the sounds of it at least, her Fowler's Delight property wasn't so delightful. It very could be that she had been abusing her servants, including Sainsbury, and that he just used this excuse, the excuse of witchcraft, to get her killed, basically out of their lives to stop the suffering, or for some other reason, I don't know, maybe some financial reasons, but from the sounds of it, she might have not been the best master. Though, of course, this is a very, very one way to look at it. We don't get any thoughts or words from Fowler herself, only from the court and testimony. And it's interesting how the court sided with Sainsbury over Fowler, considering he's an indentured servant and she's a landowner. You'd think that the social disparity there, they take her side over his. So, which could showcase either maybe some sort of bias, whether that be gendered, or maybe she had a bad reputation. But then that comes into play because since this was at the provincial court and not her local court, there wouldn't be as much interference from like whatever people thought of her in her hometown. So again, that bias comes into play, and then maybe at the end of the day, there was just enough evidence to convict. After all, witchcraft was a serious crime back then that they believed in. And if they saw the evidence, it could have just been enough for them. Could have been convincing. And what comes into play here that I kind of think is the case, basically, a couple years later, another woman who was accused of witchcraft, called Hannah Edwards, she's actually found not guilty. She's acquitted of the crimes. And on the jury, two of the jurors who were involved in the Edwards case were involved with the Fowler's case, which makes me think of that this wasn't a case of just like, this might have not been a case of just like the town like ganging on her, basically, like some hysterical event where they just saw what they wanted to see. Maybe they saw legitimate evidence that they had been thinking rationally, and that they saw, oh, this is enough evidence for us to convict. We're not fully sure, but the judge lay down your ruling, basically saying that this isn't like Salem, where people are just like, oh, there's this woman or there's this person that doesn't have a great reputation, let's get rid of them. This is, oh, there's a solid amount of evidence, let's get rid of it. And when there isn't enough evidence, we don't do it. With Hannah Edwards, and yeah, just some final thoughts. And Finn, thank you very much.